back. I'm live. Okay. All right. Hey, everybody. It's really nice to meet you. I'll give you a little brief background on who I am. So I wear many hats. One of those hats that I wear is writer. I'm the author of many books on a wide variety of topics. So everything from human history to natural history, from urban development to sustainable food, from river conservation to marine science. I'm also a nature photographer. In October, a book will be published about the Olympic Peninsula that features some of my nature photography. So I'm really excited about that. And over the years, I've been fortunate to be part of creative collaborations with some really interesting people and organizations. For example, I've been able to work with the Library of Congress curators to publish a book of historic maps from their archives. I've worked with Patagonia on a film connected to a book that I published. And right now, I'm collaborating with plankton artists to develop sculptures and playgrounds to help raise awareness about the importance of plankton in the world's oceans. I also write for an outdoor adventure magazine, and all of my adventure stories have a natural history focus. So, for example, I just published a story about snorkeling with salmon in rivers and snorkeling with amphibians in alpine lakes. And when I'm not doing photography and writing, I am a nature and science educator. That's my real passion. And also traveling. I've led tours all around the world, places like China, New Zealand, Guatemala. And I've worked as a naturalist on historic tall ships sailing the Salish Sea. I've worked as a naturalist on biking, hiking, and kayaking tours in Alaska. Now I'm based in the Pacific Northwest. So for the past several years, I've been leading wildlife excursions, birding tours, forest ecology walks, explorations of the intertidal zone. I've taken people to search for mammoth tusks. I've taken people on mushroom tours. I've taught people about prairie preservation in the Pacific Northwest. I've educated groups ranging from kindergartners to college professors, people of all abilities and all backgrounds. So I love learning, and I think the only thing better than learning is sharing what I've learned with other people who are curious and excited about exploring the world, people like you, hopefully. And this Atlantic Island Odyssey that I'm part of is it's really exciting because it explores a magnificent part of our planet. It's a region that's rich with geographic diversity and biodiversity, but also with cultural diversity. So I just got back from a Naturalist Journeys tour to Scotland, which was fantastic. And what I learned there about Scottish history and culture and shared with our group, all that's going to be relevant to this Atlantic Island Odyssey because there's a really strong Scottish influence on these islands. And there's also a really interesting Acadian influence from the original French settlers. And we're going to go to an island that's literally part of France. So we get to go to Europe without jet lag. And of course, there are indigenous people that have been in this region from time immemorial and have carried forward their rich cultural traditions. So there's a wealth of culture to explore and learn about and enjoy. And of course, there's a lot of natural history to be explored on this tour too. Way too much for me to talk about here, but I'll just highlight real quickly a couple things that really pop out at me. I'm excited about all of it, but I'm probably most excited about puffins. I love all seabirds, especially auks and especially puffins. I've led puffin tours and done puffin research, and I just have an endless fascination with these birds. And we'll have a great chance of seeing Atlantic puffins and a lot of other seabirds. And there's this Ipswich sparrow, which I'm really excited about. It's a subspecies of savanna sparrow that lives on Sable Island, which is a sand spit that's teeming with wild horses. So we've got an endemic sparrow on an island with wild horses in the wild Atlantic. I don't know if it gets any better than that. I'm not sure how I fell into this job, but it's pretty much the greatest gig in the world. I love geology. That's one of my longtime fascinations, and I'm especially excited about this feature called the Gully that we'll sail over. It's this really cool geologic feature. It's a vast undersea canyon system that contains cold water corals, which is something I've been learning about for the past several years. It's a new frontier in scientific research, going down deep into the ocean and learning about these hidden cold water coral ecosystems. So that's super cool. That'll be fun to talk about on the trip. And this gully system also concentrates currents, which concentrate plankton, which concentrate forage fish, which leads to an abundance and diversity of all the big charismatic things we like to see, like seabirds and whales. We'll have a great chance to see sea mammals on this tour. I'm really excited about the whale watching possibilities. I spend a lot of time with whales in my backyard waters here in the Pacific Northwest. I paddleboard with them whenever I have the chance. I've paddleboarded with minke whales and humpback whales and killer whales many times and spent a lot of time with them, but it'll be fun to see species that I know in the Atlantic. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to maybe see some species that I don't know so much about that I'm learning about right now, like the northern bottlenose whale. So in the interest of time, I'll kind of leave it at that for what I'm excited about. And I'll just briefly say my guiding style is basically to make sure people are comfortable and safe, take care of all those basic needs first. And then I feel like it's my job to facilitate conversation, to get people talking and thinking and questioning. And I like to figure out what people are curious about, what excites them, what they want to learn most, and then help people figure those things out and help them satisfy their curiosity. And I like to have fun on my trips. I don't think learning should be overly serious. I feel like if people in my group aren't laughing, I'm probably doing something wrong. Not that I'm that funny. Stand-up comedian is not one of the many hats that I wear, but I do try to create an environment in which people feel comfortable and relaxed and have some laughs and have a good time while we're learning. So I hope you can join me on this odyssey and we can explore one of the world's great places together. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve. I am going to make Amelia the host now so she can show us the deck we've got.
Okay, can everyone see that all right? Okay.
All right, and Greg Smith is here to take it away.
Thank you. Kit, it is nice to see you on that screen. I didn't see you right away, but so good to see you again. My name is Greg Smith. I've been working with Peg doing tours since 2007. I think Peg was generous enough 3 days after I retired to set me on my tour career. So I've done well over 100 for her and close to 200 altogether as we go along. I've done this tour before. Most all of the stops, there's one or two that I haven't gotten into, but maybe we can just scroll through the first part of this, and then I've got some slides I'd like to share with people of some of the locations. A lot of them are wildlife and birds, but there are some location shots, so you have an idea of, what a French territory looks like, and on the other side of the Atlantic from France and the like, just to give you an idea. So, can you scroll through this, Amelia, or can I?
That'll be me if you just want to let me know.
Okay, you just scroll through the map and down to the map for me. That'd be great. So you start in St. John's and you end up in St. Pierre, and you'll probably see more of St. Pierre than we did on our tour. We did dock there. There's a wonderful island there called Grand Colombière, and it's a bird nesting island and just full of murres, and Steve mentioned the puffins and the like. But you'll go down to Sable Island, then up to Bird Island, which we've been to before, and then to Cheticamp, which is up in the Cape Breton area of Nova Scotia, and then Charlottetown, and then I'll say the Magdalen Islands for ease, and then Francois, and then down to St. Pierre. So when you're down in this lower portion going from St. John's to Sable Island, you're going to have a lot of opportunities for whales in that area. And so you'll see that at the beginning of your trip. And then when you get back to going down to St. Pierre, that channel in between the peninsula there and St. Pierre is just loaded with whales and marine mammals. So that's just two of my favorite spots on this. We go down a little bit more. So, yeah, barrel. But the horses are so photogenic out there, and they're pretty well habituated to people. And you don't get real close, but you can certainly zoom in on them and see a lot of interactions like this. Nobody's a gelding out there, you know, so all the stallions are doing their thing. And it's a fun time to spend out there. Now, most of the landings are on the north side of the island. We were fortunate enough that the sea conditions allowed us to land on the south side of the island, where it's the winds are in your favor and the like. So at this time of year, you are going to get this sunny weather. You might get a little morning fog, but you get some stunning shots of these animals out there on the beach. One of the things Steve talked about were the Atlantic puffins, and Atlantic puffins are pretty common at most of the nesting colonies. You will see those at Grand Colombier, Bird Islands, and, you know, while you're out, you know, doing days at sea, you know, transiting from one place to another. So you'll get lots of opportunities for photographs. And if you're interested in photography, I would be out early in the morning. One of the things that these cruises allow us to do is get up in the forward lounge, and you get to watch what's coming at you, and you can see for miles off of this forward lounge, and that's where you get to look for the whales and the dolphins. And there's always 2 or 3 naturalists on board the ship that are very much into dolphins, and then there's 2 or 3 that are very much into seabirds. So you'll see these Atlantic puffins. They're a common bird, but, you know, to get a really good shot, I would say when your last day at Grand Colombier and at Bird Islands is where you're going to get the opportunity. Can I move down the next set of pictures, please, Amelia? Ospreys, yeah, they're everywhere. More Atlantic puffins. Great blackback gull. This is if you haven't seen one, they're a massive bird, and they forage on all the other birds that nest here. One of the things about the Atlantic puffin is they'll nest in burrows, and it's pretty difficult when the young birds start to fledge, because the great blackback gull is out there picking them off as they take off out there. But they'll forage on just about anything from carcasses floating in the water to young birds to injured puffins and the like. And they're just a huge bird, and they're well adapted at what they do. The northern gannet is a pretty spectacular bird out there. They're a booby. You know, they're a plunge diver, and when you start seeing splashes in the water around you on the boat, you know, and you're out front or you're outside on the deck, and you start seeing these splashes, and you go, what the heck is making that? Then you have to look up, and you see these birds just coming, you know, barreling down out of the sky and going, you know, their wings are swept back, their heads pointed down, and it's just like almost like a pencil going in the water. Not a big splash, but they'll come up with a fish most of the time. And what they're foraging on there are herring. And herring's a pretty profitable crop for some of those islands out there. The Magdalene Islands, St. Pierre, and some of those smaller islands that you won't get to, but they're out fishing for herring. And one of the things, when you get to the Magdalene Islands, they do a lot of salted herring there. And I am pretty sure you're going to be on shore and be able to get to a salted herring factory and the like, and just see what they're doing in there. They just glisten gold in the afternoon light. And the Magdalene Islands also, they have a lot of fromageries out there, places that make cheese, and a lot of breweries out there. And it's a long, narrow set of islands that are connected by a roadway out there. So when you see the boobies or the gannets out there, you're going to go by some rocks where you'll have an opportunity to see them nesting out there on top of these. They're colonial nesters, and you'll see lots of these birds. Red-breasted merganser, you know, they nest, they get way up towards the high Arctic, you know, northern Alaska. I mean, they'll nest in areas further south than Alaska and across the width of North America there. And this is a nice looking male. And getting up there at that time of the year when you're there is they're just going to be done with their nesting, but they're still going to be in optimal breeding plumage. And you'll be able to get photographs like this and great observations. razorbills. Now, razorbills, we don't get those on the left side of the continent here, but they're a pretty common bird. And one of the things, I noticed on that one trip is these different birds, the puffins, the guillemots, the razorbills are all eating different fish. There's not a lot of competition between those species. They're foraging probably at different depths, and you'll get those classic pictures of a razorbill with a beak full of fish and the like. Arctic terns, very common up in that area, but once they're done nesting, they start heading south. So you're going to be there just as they're finishing nesting further north. So you should see a lot of those adjacent to the ship as you're moving from point to point. But if you went 2 or 3 weeks later, I think it'd be very challenging to find an Arctic tern up there. So it's really a good time to be up there for Arctic terns and a lot of these species. Common eider, they're everywhere. If you've got rocks on the shore, you've got common eider. And the males are pretty dapper looking. The females, well, as with a lot of species, the female does the majority of the incubation, and she just can't be that good looking. She's got to blend in. She's got to hide those eggs and hide herself out there. So next screen, please. Ipswich sparrow. Used to be its own species, but now it's a subspecies of Savannah sparrow. And you will see those on Sable Island. If you get on the island and you're a birder, this is what you want to look for. This is a species you want to look for. You might also see Nelson sparrow, which used to be called Nelson sharp-tailed sparrow, if there is some boggy areas. But you would probably have better luck for the Nelson sparrow up on Cape Breton on the peninsula up there, and in the national park up in that area. But if you see a sparrow this light colored like this and you're on Sable Island, you can check it off your list in case they ever split them up again. Bearded seals, beach is full of them. Again, back to the Sable Island horses. Lots of photos of those. St. Pierre has a lot of brightly colored houses that are scattered on part of the island, but the old part of the community, which is about 6,000 folks, is French architecture, and it's classic French. I mean, you can go and get a baguette and some herring and olive oil and things like that if you want to sit down in a little cafe and do things like that. And the Magdalen Islands are very different. Even though they speak a lot of French on those islands, it's a very different culture. So bald eagle, they've done well in their comeback, and I know you've all seen them before, but you'll see more of these. This next photo looks like Cape Breton Island, or Cape Breton. And the coastline along there is pretty spectacular, and you're going to get into some bays, and you're going to get into Cheticamp, and it's got a lot of the Acadian culture up there. So you will get into some different styles of music, and if you get a chance to go to a bar some afternoon and they're playing music there, I would say take at least half an hour and step inside and see what's going on and learn a little bit about their culture there. The next photo with the boats, probably an indication of the Bay of Fundy, whose tidal changes up 20-30 feet. And you will, at times, you'll disembark to go ashore, and you'll be pretty level with the docks, and you'll come back and you're dropping 25 feet down the ramp to get on the boat and do that. So that's one of the features I would look for while you're on the boat, and look at some of those tides and what it's doing and how they tie up those boats and the like. We have the East Coast moose over there. They're a little smaller than the Alaska moose, but they can be, if it's a cow with a calf, you have to be careful. The bulls are just they're just waiting for breeding season for the rut to happen. And you should see a few of those. And if you're walking down trails, and you hear a little rustling to your side, it's probably going to be a moose over there taking a look at you. So be aware of that when you're going for a hike with groups. More photos of probably, I'm going to say that looks like Cape Breton.
Oh, sorry, Greg. It's I think is it Cheticamp?
Cheticamp, yeah, that's on Cape Breton. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, cool. And then
Yeah.
Charlotte.
Yeah. So and then this lower right, is that St. John's? Looks like.
Lower right is Charlottetown, I think.
Okay. Anyways, these there's not a lot of people up in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. That's one of the great things about getting up there. You'll have concentrations of people, but you'll see isolated, like that little house, the red house in the upper left there, and you'll find people living out in the middle of pretty rural areas, and they usually have electricity. They have great cell service in Canada. That's a great thing. And Charlottetown and PEI, we did a couple of stops on our tour on PEI. And one of the things Prince Edward Island is known for are their mussels. They probably have the best mussels in the world. And that's what I would say. You're going to anchor in river mouths and bays, and you'll see a lot of the floating mussel beds that they have there. I implore you to have mussels when you go to Prince Edward Island. They're absolutely the best. So a few more scenery shots out there. I'm not sure exactly where these are. The Magdalen Islands, look at a map of the Magdalen Islands, and it's a long set of barriers, sand barriers that are connected, and you can actually drive from one end to the other. But getting to rocky hillsides and the like, it's pretty flat on most of those islands. But there's lots of shorebirds at that time of year. One of the things when you get out and they take you to different places on your landings, look for shorebirds on these barrier sand islands and the like, and you're going to see a lot there. I haven't been to this part of Newfoundland, and I wish I had, but looks like it'll be fun. Let's go to one more. I think we've got. So yeah, these are Saint Pierre, and it's a great little town. This is where you're going to end your trip, and I don't know how much time you get to spend ashore there, but when you dock, you're going to dock outside of town. It's a concrete dock, and it's very easy to get off the ship there, and I think that's where your trip ends. So it's a French territory, and it's one of the places. It was actually one of my favorite islands to be on at that point. So I'm gonna turn it over to John. We're gonna have time for questions at the end, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and it's all yours, John.
Let me get him
Yep.
situated.
There we go. I think I'm good. Can you hear me?
Okay, I'll pull that back up in 1 second.
Okay. Thanks, Amelia. There we go. Good evening, everybody. Can you guys see me, hear me? I noticed the screen is still on my, looks like Amelia. Can you
Can
hear
hear
me?
you fine.
Okay, good. Thanks, Greg. So I'll just give a quick introduction of myself. I'm John Carlson. I've been guiding off and on for PEG, I think probably about the same time, Greg, but a lot fewer trips. I did a couple Montana trips a long time ago, and then got busy with life. And just about maybe 5 years ago, we reconnected and started doing some Antarctic work, and I've moved into the Arctic stuff now. A couple of trips to Churchill. And so I grew up in northeastern Montana. I'm a Montana kid, far away from the coast. And pretty much my home range was centered around Montana and Wyoming for a good portion of my life until in my mid-20s, when I took a hard turn to the south and went a long ways. Wound up working in Antarctica for a number of years, from various jobs, from shoveling snow at an Antarctic base to doing research on penguins to inventory work. And that's when I kind of hooked up with a lot of the tourist work that was going on in Antarctica. I was working on board the ships, doing survey work, and then just couldn't let it go and kept looking for ways to continue to go to Antarctica. And thankfully it's worked out to continue to do that work through Naturalist Journeys. But at one point when I was working on my graduate work on penguins, a very good friend of mine had started her PhD, and she was studying Arctic seabirds. And about 24 years ago, I was invited to come join her on a research cruise. And it was one of the most, fun, I guess is the best way to describe it, trips I've ever done. We were studying seabirds in the Northwater Polynya, which is Polynya is an area of consistently open water in the high Arctic due to primarily ocean currents that keeps the ice from forming in the dead of winter. So they serve as very important ecological reservoirs of open water and otherwise very inhospitable environment. And the Northwater Polynya sits up right at the point where Greenland and Canada come together. And I remember standing on the bow of the ship and seeing Greenland off on the right and Canada off on the left as we were pointed north. So worked back and forth across Baffin Bay. We started in Resolute, which is where this trip will end. But fortunately for me, I actually stayed on board the ship as we moved back and forth across northern Baffin Bay to visiting communities in Greenland and Canada, and wound up kind of coming down through that same geography that we just got done talking about, and finished up my cruise in Quebec City, where we disembarked from the Pierre Radisson. It was a French-Canadian icebreaker with a great crew. Just had a wonderful time. So this trip, August of 2024, will be exactly 25 years since I was last in the high Arctic and Greenland and Canada. I've been doing a couple, like I said, a couple of trips to Churchill. That's still pretty far south. And I want to put another quick plug in. This is an August trip. And if you really want to see the Arctic in the springtime, I'm also leading a trip to Svalbard in late June. So that would be a little bit earlier in the season and a different side, the other side of Greenland, without actually getting to Greenland. So early August in the Arctic, Canada and Greenland, I'm so excited to get back. It's another one of my, I just like these high latitudes. And as we were talking earlier, like Greg said, being in a place where you are not the apex predator puts a little bit different twist in your interactions with the environment. So we can go to the next slide. This is the route that we have planned for you. Flight from Toronto to Kangerlussuaq, and I'm going to have to work on my Inuit pronunciations. I probably am butchering that, but there's a large former military landing strip there. My understanding is we'll disembark from the plane, get on Zodiacs, the rubber boats, and get ferried out to the ship. And then it's a long drive down in the ship, down the fjord, 25 miles, I think, down this fjord from Kangerlussuaq to the open ocean. We'll spend, I'm just going to talk here about the quick route here, but then I'll get into a little bit more details in the next slide. So the Sisimiut coast, as we head north and then into Inuit, where there's a huge glacier that comes down into the ocean there. Disco Bay is that large bay where Illusit sits at the head of. And then another day up the coast and across the Davis Straits into Canada. Pond Inlet. I actually was privileged to visit Pond Inlet during my trip there. Tiny little village. I didn't get to spend much time. It was pretty much a helicopter ride to the airport and pick some tools up and turn around a helicopter back to the ship. But that whole Davis Strait then that you move along Devon Island, Beachy Island, and back to Resolute is just thriving with Arctic wildlife. There's a very large island, Prince Leopold Island, that's cliffs. It's a round island that's essentially cliffs all the way around, and thick-billed murres all around that. Yeah, so this is kind of the geographically the route that we'll be taking. If we can go to the next slide. So like I said, the overview of this itinerary here, we've got that first day in Kangerlussuaq to get on the ship, then go down along the coast out to Simiut, Illusiat. Day 4 is just Western Greenland. So I think that's kind of an interesting day of exploration around the northern coast, north of Illusiat, and looking to see what we can find. I think those are some of my favorite days, is when we're just kind of exploring along the coast and seeing what we can see. And then day 5 will make looks like a rather quick trip across Davis Strait, kind of the southern end of Baffin Bay. And what I remember from my trip there, going back and forth across Baffin Bay, a couple of things come to mind. The first one is watching a gyrfalcon fly across. I could see him coming a long ways away. And there were 2 glaucous gulls trailing this gyrfalcon pretty closely. I couldn't figure out what they were doing until I realized that gyrfalcon had captured a dovekie, a little small seabird, and was eating it on the wing. As he was flying, he was reaching down and eating this dovekie. And the glaucous gulls were following along, waiting for scraps to fall out as this gyrfalcon was eating on the wing. And then the big white bear. Early in the morning, getting up and being on the bridge of the ship and watching this polar bear just making its way across the ice floes and swimming in between ice floes and back up, and just seeing polar bears in that sea ice environment. They're wonderful to see in Churchill in the springtime and summer when they come on shore as they wait the sea ice to form. But seeing them out in the sea ice is even more spectacular. That's where they belong. It's the environment they've been entirely adapted to living in. And it's just so neat to see them out on that ice. So hopefully we'll have good observations going across. And as Greg said, I encourage everybody to get up and be out and about on the ship when we're underway, early in the morning, in the evening. There's a lot of daylight that time of year, and sleep is going to be challenging because I have a hard time going to sleep because there's so much going on and it's daylight, and it's really hard to tear myself away from watching to see what's going on. And then, as I said, we get to visit Pond Inlet, and these Inuit communities in Greenland and Canada are very interesting. They're just wonderful places. And I think we've got some photos. We'll touch on those in a little bit. Lancaster Sound, like I said, just teeming with wildlife. It's a very popular spot for a lot of whales, belugas. Hopefully we'll see narwhals. That was one animal I missed on my trip there that I would really love to see. So I'm going to be looking extra hard for narwhals and walrus, all sorts of great stuff through there. And then Beachy Island. This is where this trip really intersects with some very interesting history and some unique ties to the continental work I've been doing in the South, and that Mount Erebus was named after the ship that was I'd drawn a blank on who the explorer was that had it in the South, but Franklin's expedition used the Erebus when they got lost in northern Canada. And the Erebus and Terror, both ships were in Antarctica, were just recently found sunk in Baffin Bay. but Beachy Island is where a lot of his crew kind of wound up, and there's a couple of graves there. So some really interesting intersections with colonial history. At the same time, we'll be visiting these Inuit communities that have such a direct line to their culture from time immemorial. So I'm really looking forward to this. And then, unfortunately, last day, 13 days, we'll disembark in Resolute and catch a flight back to our homes. So next slide, please. These are some of the birds in particular that I'm hoping to see on this trip. Mentioned gyrfalcon already in the lower right. We talked a little bit about razorbills. We're going to be kind of at the northern edge of razorbills, hoping to see them. It's going to be early on in the trip. White-tailed sea eagle is one that shows up on a lot of the lists for birds around Greenland. I'd love to see one of those. We'll keep our fingers crossed. Northern wheat ears are really common across the Arctic, and a fun little bird to see along with snow buntings and Lapland longspurs. But that in particular, that was one I remember distinctly from that trip, because I wasn't really expecting what I always considered a European species to show up in my travels in Canada. Thick-billed murres, very common. We'll see them almost assuredly at this time of the year. The chicks are bailing out of their nesting cliffs. They do this leap of faith, launch off these cliffs that they were raised on, land in the water. The male of the pair is actually calling them off the cliffs, and he's the one who takes care of them from the time that they fledge, leave their nest, until they're old enough to fly and go on their own. So you'll see these males hauling their chicks away on the water because they can't fly. They essentially just drop off the cliff, and taking them out and getting them fed until they can fly on their own. Probably the most desirable bird on this trip for me would be, well, I'm going to say that they're all desirable, but I just love seeing ivory gulls, pure white. They remind me so much of the snow petrels in the Antarctic that I just love snow petrels. And so just pure white gulls are really appealing and quite rare. So seeing them would be a real treat. Redneck phalaropes, again, later on in the season, like Greg mentioned, we're even a little bit later than the Atlantic Odyssey trip. Hopefully we'll see those. And purple sandpipers are always an option or possibility, particularly on the Greenland side. So next slide, please. And this is a new trip for Naturalist Journeys. And I've never worked this far south in Greenland. Most of my work was quite a bit farther north. So I'm really interested in visiting these Inuit communities, Kangersluk and Sisimiut. One of the things I remember, I was quite a bit north in a little village called Kanak. And the part that intrigued me the most was the racks of handmade kayaks, skin-covered kayaks that they were still utilizing. And seeing a film of this Inuit gentleman who had butchered a huge walrus. I mean, walrus are just huge, right? By himself while sitting in the kayak at sea, and had managed to butcher this whole walrus while he was sitting in this kayak. Just phenomenal strength and skill and just that cultural history of learning to be able to do that is just absolutely fascinating. Very much subsistence communities, very in tune with the environment in which they live, and fascinating people to me. I always enjoyed visiting with them and learning more about the culture. So Sisimiut, I don't know any of these communities, but I'm really looking forward to learning them with those of you that are able to come with. Next slide. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, Ilulissat is at the terminus of a large glacier coming off the Greenland ice sheet. And so lots of icebergs in Disco Bay where that's at. And then that coast of Western Greenland, again, I'll just share another quick little memory of Greenland. We were in a Zodiac, and it was a foggy day, and we were exploring the coastline. And I remember going down this narrow channel with kind of, I wouldn't say cliffs, but steep rocky edges. And I turned around and looked behind us as we were going through, and I could see an Inukshuk out in the fog up above us. And Inukshuks are little stone cairns that Inuit use to mark different things, directions or notable locations, or where villages were, that sort of stuff. Just to me, an enduring symbol of my trip to Greenland. Next slide. And I mentioned Davis Strait, coming across and going in between the islands there. Pond Inlet, a beautiful little community. Again, Devon's going to be interesting because I'm not sure how much life we're going to see, but it's got a lot of history. And then Beachy Island as well. I kind of talked about all of those. So we'll go to the next slide here. Yeah, Lancaster Sound, like I was talking earlier, Canada's newest national marine conservation area. Home for Inuit and wildlife, and you can see the figures here. Narwhals again. I'd love to see some narwhals, the common murres. Second most dense polar bear population in the world. So again, that idea of seeing polar bears out in this ice environment is just so attractive, and I'm really looking forward to spending some time looking for them. Next slide. Yeah, we didn't touch on this slide from the last one, but the ship is the Ocean Endeavor. Never been on this ship before, but most of these vessels that I've been on have been excellent, from staff to naturalists that are employed. Greg mentioned having staff naturalists on board the ship. I've always had really good luck with the people that are hired to do these trips. Excellent naturalists and Zodiac drivers. They're also the ones keeping an eye out for polar bears for us when we're on shore. And again, good food, nice stable platform that will move us around between different places that we talked about. So again, looking forward to spending some time on the ship with anybody. Next slide. And I think that's the conclusion. Just wonderful Arctic wildlife on both of these trips. And yeah, I'm looking forward to spending some time with any of you that are able to come along with.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. If anyone has any questions and they want to enter them into the chat box here, we've got some time to answer a few.
How much shore time?
That's a good question. I think based on, and I don't know this particular shipping company, but generally what we would do in most of the trips I've been on is 2 landings per day. So we would spend 2 to 3 hours on shore in the morning, another 2 to 3 to 4 hours. And again, we're working with lots of daylight in the afternoon. And then most of our transit time in between locations happens during the night, if I can call it that. But yeah, a fair amount of time on shore at each one of those places.
Do you get up on the glacier at Ilisuat?
I suspect not. Just from a liability standpoint, hauling people up on top of the glacier might be, without proper equipment, might be a little bit of a risk for them, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, thank you.
And I noticed there's a question in the chat here. Just says Dovekies ? And I don't know from the Atlantic Odyssey one, but I would venture to guess that we will see Dovekies and quite a few of them on the Greenland trip.
Yeah, we're a little too far south on the Odyssey trip to see Dove Keys, but if you go into eBird or look at trip reports from people up in that area, you should see Dove Keys. Maybe not one being eaten on the wing by a gyrfalcon, but you should see Dove Keys on the high Arctic trip.
And I'll put in a little pitch too for the Svalbard trip in June. That trip would most certainly see dovekies at the breeding grounds as well.
We've
A
got a
follow-
couple of similar questions here about how big the ships are, how many passengers they can take, multiple groups with their own guides. We do have our separate Naturalist Journeys group, but those of you who have done those trips, could you speak to how big those groups are?
I can actually tell you how many passengers the ship can hold, if that helps. It's just under 200 people and about 130 staff members, if that helps.
And most of the Zodiacs, you'll go out, seat 12 people. You are certainly, hopefully you'll stay with Steve or John and I up north when we go out in the Zodiacs, but there's going to be things that are going to pull you in a different direction. And if you want to go on a Zodiac that goes look at the cultural things in one of the villages, by all means do that. You will find John and I and Steve on his trip up on the bridge or somewhere in the forward lounge all the time looking for things. So about 12 seaters on the Zodiacs, and everybody wants to be up front, but that's the folks that are going to catch the waves for us and protect the rest of us. So anyways, it's fun time.
Yeah.
Are the Zodiacs daily?
Yes.
Okay, so a number of trips each day.
Yeah. So again, I'm not entirely sure about the particular company, but most of the trips, all the trips that I've been on, generally have half the passengers would go ashore, another half would be in Zodiacs, and we would do what we call Zodiac cruises, and then we would switch. And so you'd be going back and forth. And to add on to Greg's comment that there's groups of people that go ashore, and in the Antarctic, I'm not sure about the Antarctic if there's regulations or if it's just self-regulated about the number that people that can be on shore at any one time. But the ship's staff will be on shore. Greg and I will be on shore or in the Zodiac on a Zodiac cruise. But there's always opportunities to go and do things on your own. There isn't like it's constrained. So there's some freedom there, but there's some options and availability for us and ship staff to talk about whatever and interact with folks on a more one-on-one basis.
Thank you.
We have some questions about the mandatory medical evacuation insurance that's required by the cruise operators. These particular ships do require that for anyone booking these trips. Essentially, it covers, if something were to happen to you, if you had a medical emergency while on the trip, there are doctors, but if you had to be flown out, if you're in an area where you need additional assistance, it's really unlikely, but it would cover those risks. So these particular cruises do require that insurance.
What's the cost?
It would be up to your insurance provider. So we can suggest, we use Alliance, they're really good, or we suggest them. Travelex has good policies. Let's see.
Medjet.
Oh, go ahead.
Medjet.
Medjet.
Yeah. But they can give you a quote. We're not a travel insurance company, but I'm happy to send a number of recommendations if you're shopping around.
Thank you.
I see a couple of questions in there about weather.
Weather, and Eric asked about the seas calm, if you guys could shed some light on that.
Greg, do you want to hit your section?
Yeah, in the area of the Odyssey trip, I would say they're mostly calm. You're in the calm time of year. There's not a lot of storms in that area when you're up there. So if you're prone to seasickness, they have great drugs on both of these ships. And the other thing is, if you're prone to seasickness, just get your cabin in the middle of the ship, not in the front, not in the bow, not in the stern. You want to be in the middle where there's less movement. But my wife can get seasick, and I don't get seasick, and she hasn't been seasick on most all of these trips, including the Antarctic a number of times, and the Arctic. So you're going at the right time of the year, and that's something Naturalist Journeys does all the time. We're not going to send you Alaska in the middle of July when it's black fly and mosquito season. We're going to take you at the right time of year for comfort.
I would echo that even farther north, Greg, that my recollection, granted it was 24 years ago, is that the only time I'm prone to seasickness, so I'm very aware of that. And the only time I recall and again, I was on an icebreaker, which are notoriously unstable on the water because they've got a nice rounded hull to slide up on the ice to break the ice. And that was late in the season as we were coming back down along the coast. So the only time I see in that itinerary that looks particularly exposed is one day across the Davis Strait. And I guess the other thing I can mention is the one thing I can almost guarantee it'll be a little chilly. But other than that, my weather prediction is not that accurate. So it'll be wet and chilly.
Do we have any final questions from anyone before I ask the guides a final question?
Are you cruising at night or stationary?
Generally moving between positions at quote night. It'll be a lot of daylight, but that's the time when they move from, on the itinerary from one place to another is over the evening and nighttime hours.
Okay.
Yeah, we could do some comments. Let's see. We do that. Let's see. One last question before I
Peg, if you were talking, your microphone's off.
Amelia, can you unmute Peg? Or did we do that?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
There you go. Oh, there you are.
Okay. I just wanted to pop out in here because I have done this route and it was one of the most extraordinary things I've done in my life. I can't even tell you what the beauty is like in Disco Bay, where these colorful Danish homes line the waterfront, and all around you are icebergs of every size, shape, and color. And these are huge. They're way bigger than any of the homes. And as sunset hits, you're out in your little Zodiac. You can't get too close because they can flip, and every once in a while one does, and it's incredibly dramatic. But the sides that have been underwater have round, like baby butt textures, and the sides that have been floating up are quite rough. And the photography, as light comes in and these things turn pink and gold, it's just incredible. But there's fascinating geology all along the route. There's a lot of ancient rocks at Kangerlussuaq at the airport are some of the oldest rocks on Earth. And then crossing through the brash ice, you have to have a special ice pilot to make the crossing. And so where you cross is determined by ice flow. And at Pond Inlet, we were able to go ashore and we went into the school classroom. And even back then, we watched these Inuit children who are about to pop in the boat and they say, oh yeah, we see narwhal all the time. But they're emailing their pen pal in Florida or somewhere, having this conversation about their different lifestyles. And then the further we went up at Prince Leopold Island, we saw polar bears feeding on the carcasses of seabirds that fell off the cliffs. So I will end my exciting voyage. Someday I'd love to get back there. I'm envious, John, but I know that you're our polar expert, and I pass the hat to you. You're going to have an amazing journey.
Thanks, Peg.
I don't want to keep anyone too long, but we're just at an hour, and I wanted to ask our guides if they had one thing they were most looking forward to on these trips, what would it be? John, you can go first.
Oh boy. One thing, I could keep going for like another hour, I think, of things I'm excited about on this trip, and the other one too. I think I just got to put in the plug for Svalbard as well. Polar bears are always just, yeah, seeing, like I said, seeing them out on the ice. But I had to pick one bird or something. I don't know. Maybe just sharing that like Peg was just describing, that place and that daylight and the scenery and the people. The Arctic is a special place, and it's unique from Antarctica because of the people and the long history of human occupancy in the Arctic and the way people have adapted to living there, which has a very different flavor than the Antarctic, and that difference is really appealing. I don't know. I keep going. One word, can't do it.
Good answer. Greg or Steve?
Well, I'll go ahead. To me, it's all about anticipation. You just don't know what you're going to see. You will look out there and you'll go, what is that? And I mean, you will see things that you will never see again. And the joy, the excitement of finding it on your own and trying to figure out what you're looking at is just, I think it's the most precious thing about being on these ships where you go where nobody else gets to go, and you get to see things that nobody else gets to see. And you have these memories when you go home. And it doesn't matter which direction you look, you just keep looking out there and you're going to find all these little treats. To me, that's these type of cruises, especially in the untreed north or south, is just like, thank you.
Yeah, so what I'm looking most forward to is seeing the excitement of the guests. That's what really gets me excited. I've had a lot of great opportunities in my life. I've been really fortunate to have a lot of amazing natural history experiences, but they don't mean as much to me as seeing other people excited. That's what I really like. I love curiosity. I celebrate curiosity in myself, and I love to see it in other people. And when people get excited on trips and I can help them satisfy their curiosity and learn about the world, that's what really fires me up. So that can be anything. I mean, whether we're looking at puffins, or if we see a northern bottlenose whale, or we go out on a shore excursion and check out some cool geology, or learn about some interesting culture. It doesn't really matter what the source of it is, as long as people are excited to learn and curious. That's what I'm excited about. I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email us at travel@naturalistjourneys.com. And we hope you have a great Monday night. It's Monday, right?
Yeah.
If this recording works, I'll try to put it on the Facebook, put it on our YouTube channel and post it to the Facebook page.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.